Here are 10 romantic comedies, one per decade, covering the 100-year period between 1919 to 2019. Actually, before I get into that, let me address the melodramatic discussions that have surrounded this genre for the past few years. It seems the panic has taken over the discourse of some of our cinephile friends. They believe the ongoing death of the rom-com portends an impending death of cinema. Their points are valid and soundly articulated. After all, the age of streaming has been rather unkind to perhaps the most important genre of all time. What was once a genre that created stars has been reduced to poorly written and grossly under-directed movies, pumped out at the rate of one film a day onto streaming services that care more about money than art. Our distressed cinephile friends are correct. We must not allow this genre to die. We need cinematic experiences that offer a more diverse menu than what we are currently getting. We need crazy and outlandish comedies. We need sincere romances. We need movies that break the pattern of our current metamodern and postmodern narrative hell. We need stories that have nothing to do with saving the world or the universe. Thankfully, the historical precedent, somewhere between the mid-1960s to the late 80s, the rom-com virtually disappeared. New Hollywood was born. Teen movies rose into popularity. Sci-fi got huge. This was a good thing. Cinema must evolve. Rom-coms didn't die though. They hibernated. And then, like a bolt of lightning, the genre that had made Golden Age Hollywood golden returned and painted the next 3 decades with an unmatched nostalgic glow. I propose we pray for a bolt of lightning. Somewhere, someone is working on a 2030s equivalent to When Harry Met Sally. While we wait for them to finish their masterpiece, here is the list of 10 romantic comedies. There will be no teen romantic movies covered here. They deserve their own separate video. The 1920s had a wealth of comedies. It was inevitable given that sound wasn't a thing in this decade. The directors of this era were also working with a blank slate of an industry. No rules, no expectations, just cameras and impressively experimental stories. It also doesn't hurt that the finest physical comedians of all time happened to be alive during this time. Accidentally, and I mean this in a good way, romantic comedies would end up being invented in this chaotic but creatively innocent decade. Charlie Chaplin has a few movies that come close to being considered romantic comedies. However, the Trump doesn't seem to get a happy ending with his romantic interests. He gets some bittersweet endings, some vague endings, and sometimes he outrightly hands over the woman he's been pining over to another man. So this isn't ideal. Buster Keaton, though, has a few romantic comedy candidates. I originally considered A Hospitality, but this story has a macabre element hanging over it. It's still a fun dark comedy though. I also considered Seven Chances, but it's in my opinion more of a comedy. Therefore I had to keep looking. The Cameraman is what I picked. It's a movie that fits very well into the mold of a romantic comedy. It, the Clara Bow movie, was also considered and is in fact my runner-up for this decade. I haven't watched all Buster Keaton movies, mostly because I don't want to run out of them. However, in the 5 of 6 that I've watched, only 2 feature a meet cute. In Our Hospitality, he meets his love interest in this thing that passes for a train. In The Cameraman, the meet cute is in fact rather modern. He meets her while they are both at work. He's a teen type cameraman. She, on the other hand, coordinates newsreel cameramen. Oh yeah, TV is not a thing yet. Radio broadcasting is so young it can't even drink. People watch news at the cinema. Very posh, I know. Anyway, she works with important cameramen while he captures photos that end up being used as ashtrays. She's also beautiful. Obviously, he's got to have her. He immediately quits his job and becomes a newsreel cameraman just to be around her. He needs to prove himself though, if he's to get her attention. If you've watched Keaton before, you know what you're going to get. Comical misadventure after comical misadventure until finally we get a happy ending. What then makes this movie, that was made 6 years after the birth of Betty White, a romantic comedy? It meets the only criteria that I consider to be important. It has a love story and it makes me laugh. It has other elements too. A fun sidekick, a love rival, and a main character who is out of his depth. It's also a Buster Keaton movie. If that last sentence means nothing to you, shame on you. Sorry for judging. Please watch Buster Keaton movies. They are ridiculous and totally worthy of your time. The 1930s, upon inheriting the economic scenes of its more upbeat and carefree predecessor, prescribed an unhealthy dose of escapism to its occupants. The movies of this decade are meant to make you forget the abject poverty that's waiting for you at home. You might be hanging around the soup kitchen, but hey, at least you get to watch Clark Gable goof around. If you think the 90s had a lot of rom-coms, you have clearly not met the 30s. This is the decade of romantic comedies. It standardizes the genre by creating some of its finest specimens. Bringing Up Baby, My Man Godfrey, You Can't Take It With You, The Awful Truth, just to name a few. Out of all the great romantic comedies of the 1930s, one stands out. 1934's It Happened One Night. It's the movie that pioneered the genre's biggest tropes. It may not be the first movie to marry comedy and romance, but it's the movie that gave all future romantic comedies their identity. As you'll see, as we progress towards the 2010s, no movie can call itself a romantic comedy if it doesn't share storytelling DNA with It Happened One Night. This trope is not about social status, by the way. Romantic comedies like It and romances like Possessed had already done the poor girl attracts rich man story. The opposites attract trope that is introduced here is more about the differences in values and personalities of our two leads. Peter and Ellie dislike each other at first sight. Even after Peter discovers who Ellie is, he still thinks of her as a ticket to getting a great story and therefore regaining his employment as a journalist. If you've watched any movies that came out before 1934, you would know that witty banter isn't a new thing. Some directors in the 1920s even managed to place some witty banter in the title cards. It Happened One Night takes this banter, makes it fast-paced and combative. Perhaps this decision was fueled by the fact that these two characters come from different backgrounds, or perhaps it was because this kind of dialogue is quite fun actually. Regardless of the motivation, the results are iconic. The fast-paced, witty, and combative dialogue introduced here will become a mainstay of the romantic comedy genre. Whether it's Peter and Ellie sitting next to each other on the bus, or them sharing a room at the camp, forced proximity is used here as an excuse to get them to fall in love. Our hospitality does something similar with Buster Keaton and his love interest, who end up sitting together on this excuse for a train. So, it's not entirely new. However, sharing a room is new. If you've ever watched a scene where two characters go to a hotel and there's only one room left, now you know which movie to blame. Ellie is traveling under a false identity to avoid being tracked down by her father. She even manages to hang out with the common folk in a bus. No one knows who she is. This trope is going to be huge, I promise you. It's going to create an entire genre of romantic comedies when you get to the 1950s. Ellie meets Peter, an ex-journalist who dislikes her wealth and upbringing. He's rugged, wild, rude, and takes every opportunity to berate her. Cheap romantic comedies and movies made by Hallmark are going to make a lot of money from this one. Turns out Peter isn't so bad after all. He takes care of her. Even if he's doing it for his own benefit, he still helps her. Without this trope, we don't end up with a romance. The bad boy can't be that bad, otherwise our heroine doesn't end up falling for him. This trope will be making storytellers money for the next few millennia. Peter pretends he's married to Ellie to protect her from a loudmouth passenger on the bus. It's how they end up sharing a room. He also pretends to be her abusive husband when private detectives sent by her father come to their room to find if Ellie is there. I'm not sure that the writers of this movie understood the kind of monster they unleashed when they introduced this trope. If you've watched any romantic comedy, you know this trope. Meet the Parents is a movie that is built entirely on this trope. Ellie's father is a very rich man who will do everything to get his daughter to return home. By the end of the movie though, he ends up helping her marry Peter. That's the second half of this trope. The antagonistic parent isn't that bad after all. They just didn't want to lose their daughter. Fortunately, our male love interest is a good man. He easily gets the antagonistic parent on their side. Peter leaves Ellie alone for the night to fetch money from New York so that they can get married. Ellie is woken up in the middle of the night and thinks that Peter has abandoned her. It had a similar trope in its third act, but given that it was a silent movie, I'm giving this to It Happened One Night. I'm sorry, I'm an apologist for talkies. Obviously, some movies take this trope too far, sometimes introducing misunderstandings in every act. This doesn't work because most of these misunderstandings can be solved by a simple phone call or one line of dialogue. The 1940s is perhaps the most golden of golden age Hollywood. It's a decade that has more mature romantic comedies. By the start of this decade, the formula that had started with It Happened One Night has been perfected. His Girl Friday, The Philadelphia Story, My Favorite Wife, and The Shop Around the Corner were all released in 1940. What a strong start to the decade. The Shop Around the Corner is to me the perfect 1940s romantic comedy. It takes the rom-com formula and introduces so much warmth and freshness to it. Instead of a bus, our characters are forced to work together in a shop. Their meet cute is fun. She's an ambitious girl looking for a job. He's a senior employee who doesn't want to give her work. They never see eye to eye, and yet they've been exchanging letters as pen pals. If this sounds familiar, you've got Mel, the Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan movie, is a remake of this film. Here the trope is more enemies to lovers. James Stewart's and Margaret Sullivan's characters are actually very similar in personality. They are both headstrong, intelligent, and competitive. This similarity leads to them being on opposite ends of most arguments. They openly acknowledge their dislike for each other. Getting any two characters to transition from enemies to lovers requires storytelling deftness that many writers don't possess. Fortunately for us, the writers of the shop around the corner know what they are doing. As soon as James Stewart finds out that Margaret Sullivan is his pen pal, he changes how he treats her. He takes care of her when she's sick. While Sullivan is still combative, he persists until he wins her over. The reason that this movie is on this list is because it manages to perfectly bring together comedy and sincerity. Sincerity is going to be a huge thing in romantic comedies. That's until we get to the 2010s and we end up with stories that are ashamed of letting emotional moments linger. The 1950s find Hollywood at its most experimental since the 1930s. It's the decades of musicals and Marilyn Monroe. It's the decade where the transatlantic accent starts to fade in favor of natural dialogue delivery. It's the decade of young Marlon Brando, Technicolor, and Panavision. It's the decade that the world is introduced to a new Hepburn. It's also a very competitive decade. Born Yesterday, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Sabrina, and Pillow Talk were all released in the 1950s, and these are just the best of the best. This decade is absolutely stacked with fun rom-coms, which made it very difficult for me to make a decision. The other decade that subjected me to a similar ordeal was the 90s. Oh, this decade also produced one of the greatest comedies of all time, in Some Like It Hot. The fact that it features a bit of romance confused me for long enough to almost pick it as the choice for this decade. So then, what is it that motivated me to pick Roman Holiday? I mean, for God's sake, it doesn't even have a happy ending. Roman Holiday has that untouchable quality that makes it endlessly rewatchable. This movie is golden age Hollywood showing everyone that they have perfected motion pictures. Everything from the acting, the story, and the location come together to create an instant classic. It's a movie soaked in so much nostalgia that you feel deeply overjoyed and sad at the same time as Hepburn and Peck journey their way around Rome. The moment the credits roll, you immediately want to go back and laugh as Hepburn wreaks havoc on a Vespa, or watch as she reacts with such genuine angst when Peck pretends to have his hand swallowed by the mouth of truth. As I went through the decades, I asked myself one question: does Roman Holiday have a competitor? Is there any movie in the history of romantic comedies that beats its class, sincerity, and cinematic fun? Is there any film in this genre that can claim superiority over it? One movie from the 80s can, but even then it was a very close call. Audrey Hepburn had the misfortune of having the same last name as one of the greatest actors of all time. Katharine Hepburn was already a legend by the time Roman Holiday was released, and yet, within the space of a single movie, Audrey closes down a gap that took Katharine around 2 decades to establish. She becomes instantly iconic. In fact, she becomes one of the 2 actresses the general public thinks about when 1950s cinema is brought up, the other being Marilyn Monroe. In this movie, the magic trick she pulls is that at no point does it appear that she is acting. It's as if she was hypnotized and she actually believed she was a princess. I mean, who can fault her? Gregory Peck is great, but Hepburn is perfect. This will be a theme that will repeat itself in the 1950s. In her next movie, Sabrina, she almost outdoes Humphrey Bogart, which if you know Bogart, you know how impressive an actor has to be to come close to his on-screen presence. I consider this movie to be the second of an unofficial trilogy that started with It Happened One Night. In that movie, Ellie is a rich heiress who pretends to be a normal girl in order to board a bus from Florida to New York. This false identity trope is used for a short time until Peter reveals that he knows who Ellie is. Roman Holiday takes this false identity trope and creates a new rom-com subgenre. It will be a subgenre about princes and princesses taking up false identities and falling in love. However, unlike the many boring and cheap movies that have come out of this subgenre, Roman Holiday is a movie that understands the real world, and it shows this by executing an appropriate and fitting ending. It's easier for an heiress like Ellie to marry a journalist than it is for a crown princess to marry one. This being said, there are thousands of movies where the royalty marry commoners, which means that the main theme of Roman Holiday was missed. These copycats tend to be poorer written and with much worse acting. They exist for one reason only, to perpetuate the Cinderella fantasy. And that's fine. I like the Cinderella trope as much as the next hopeless romantic, but it's rarely produced cinematic masterpieces. Roman Holiday understands that such a cloying conclusion would be a disaster to the 2 characters. Imagine Casablanca, but Ingrid Bergman decides to stay behind with Humphrey Bogart. Hold that thought for now, because the movie from the 80s, the one that I claim narrowly edges Roman Holiday to the throne, will have much more to say about this topic. Anyway, this is a perfect ending. It not only grounds the movie in the real world, but it also makes the time that Hepburn and Peck spend together much more valuable. Pillow Talk, my runner-up for the 1950s, showed that Doris Day and Rock Hudson had brilliant chemistry. It's a shockingly modern film which serves as a great indicator for the future of rom-coms, where the banter isn't just witty, but also features sexual innuendo. If you know the 1950s, you know that this is groundbreaking. When the 1960s rolled around, Hollywood realized it was no longer the most innovative film industry in the world. Three post-World War II movements were forcing cinema to evolve. Italian neorealism in the 1940s, 50s and 60s showcased cinema's ability to capture the real world and make it unforgettable. The French New Wave of the late 50s and 60s showed cinephiles around the world that American cinema was in fact lagging behind. Japanese cinema of the 50s and 60s created genre-defining films that Hollywood would end up ripping off. Consequently, the greatest films of the 1960s are French, Italian or Japanese. America started the decade making musicals and other safe movies, basically a continuation of the late 40s. It was as if they didn't know that the golden age was over. France, Italy and Japan had introduced a new age. It took Hollywood quite a bit before they got the memo. One consequence of New Age Hollywood is that the rom-com practically dies. For the next 2 decades, Hollywood's young directors will regain American dominance by creating some of the greatest movies of all time. None of these are romantic comedies. In fact, none are romances. Some good rom-coms or rom-com adjacent movies crop up every once in a while, but they're almost always directed by Woody Allen. It's in this barren wasteland that Lover Come Back is released. It reunites Doris Day and Rock Hudson. It's set in Madison Avenue in 1961. If you believe Mad Men to be the greatest TV show of all time, or close to the top, Lover Come Back offers you an intimate view of how mid-century advertising was viewed during the mid-century. Just like Pillow Talk, this is an out-and-out enemies to lovers rom-com. Day and Hudson work for rival ad companies. Hudson has a flair for winning contracts by drowning executives in alcohol and women. Day is meticulous and believes in winning contracts through hard work. Like in Pillow Talk, Hudson will adopt a false identity and use it to get close to Doris Day. This is because both movies are built on the idea that Hudson and Day don't know each other. Their rivalry usually happens over phone calls, and when they meet, Day doesn't know who he is. This gives him the opportunity to lie and take advantage of her. By the time we get to the third act, this false identity becomes a huge problem. This is because Hudson has fallen for Day, and if he reveals who he is, she will skewer him and slowly roast him over a fire. After all, they are arch enemies. It's for this reason I would recommend you watch both Pillow Talk and Lover Come Back. They're essentially one idea converted into 2 fun and colorful movies. What's Up, Doc is a rare screwball, mostly because it shows up rather late. All other members of this subgenre had come and gone in the 30s and 40s. And yet, here we are in 1972, watching Barbra Streisand play a manic pixie dream girl. Given that I couldn't cover Bringing Up Baby, it's only right that I cover the movie that was created as a love letter to the Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant classic. This is not a run-of-the-mill romantic comedy. Screwballs are never that. They're about chaos and outlandish comedy. The chaos in this movie comes from 4 identical bags, 2 of which are being tracked by thieves and spies. During the course of the movie, these 4 bags will lead the characters through cat-and-mouse chases, violence, and finally cars will be driven into the San Francisco harbor because of them. The romance comes from Barbra Streisand deciding to steal someone else's fiancé. She wasn't even looking for love. She was looking for food when she happened upon Dr. Howard Bannister, who is in town for a conference. Just like Katharine Hepburn causing absolute chaos to Cary Grant in Bringing Up Baby, Streisand decides that Dr. Bannister is hers the moment she lays her eyes on him. She then proceeds to expose the poor doctor to one chaotic event after another. Despite being funny, this movie isn't revolutionizing the genre. Woody Allen is doing that with his impressively fresh take on the rom-com. I could have picked one of his movies for this decade, but I just wanted to cover What's Up, Doc. After all, the screwball rom-com will completely disappear after this. Attempts to revive it in the new millennium won't work out, and What's Up, Doc will remain as the last great screwball movie. While it didn't introduce any new ideas to the genre, it presented an alternative view of how romance can be achieved. All screwballs propose that love is about getting someone out of their comfort zone and exposing them to a new but more fun world. Cary Grant is a scientist who's practically kidnapped by Katharine Hepburn and forced to take care of a leopard. Howard Bannister is introduced to Streisand's strange new world, ending up in a car chase involving spies and the mob. Both Cary Grant and Howard Bannister leave their fiancés for the new chaotic girl. This is an idea that non-screwball rom-coms and romances will keep. The new girl immediately exposes that you are in a rut. Your life isn't as exciting as it should be. All you need is for her to show up and break you out of your pathetic little prison. A prison that you built up by being a depressed overthinker. It's an idea that will retain popularity until 2009, when 500 Days of Summer shattered the myth of the manic pixie dream girl. However, this doesn't mean that it's dead. After all, it's a rather potent fantasy. And as long as they are writers, this romantic idea will be kept alive. Just as the 1980s wound down, the biggest evolution in romantic comedies since Roman Holiday and Pillow Talk happened. If you watch When Harry Met Sally in 2026, having only experienced romantic comedies of the 90s and the 2000s, it will seem rather normal. From this perspective, it won't feel revolutionary. Competent? Yes. Perfectly acted? Yes. Fun and heartfelt story? Yes. But greatest of all time? Probably not. However, watch it with the context of the 50s, 60s, and 70s in mind, and you end up with the same conclusion as mine. It's the greatest rom-com of all time. It's the rom-com genre distilled into a single movie. It perfected the formula that started with It Happened One Night. It contains elements from every movie I've covered so far, other than What's Up Doc, because What's Up Doc is a crazy movie. The two leads are not enemies like in Love a Comeback. However, they have a clear rivalry similar to the one in the shop around the corner. Each time Harry and Sally meet, they seem to argue about the nature of relationships and whether men and women can be friends. Their difference in opinions means that we get a lot of fun moments. It also means that we get a perfect setup for when they eventually become friends. Pillow Talk's sexual innuendo, which was groundbreaking in the 50s, is now the norm in this movie. Almost every dialogue in this movie is about love, relationships, and sex. It's a feature of writing that will remain in romantic comedies into the 2020s. Some movies like The 40-Year-Old Virgin will go as far as narrowing down the entire dialogue to just sex, which is interesting. The chemistry between Harry and Sally is better than that of Hepburn and Peck in Roman Holiday. This is down to two things. First, Harry and Sally are given more time to build this chemistry. Secondly, Harry and Sally are equals. Hepburn and Peck don't stand a chance because they are separated by both history and status. Harry and Sally are middle-class Americans. Whether they get together or not is up to them. Sincerity, one of the great qualities of the shop around the corner, is present every time Harry and Sally are communicating. It's especially visible when they become friends. Harry and Sally still fight, but they are quick to apologize to each other. It's a feature of writing that would be replaced by satire and uncomfortable jokes in the 21st century. A third act misunderstanding is also present. This trope will become a fixture in nearly all romantic comedies after this, and for most rom-coms, this misunderstanding will be executed almost similar to the way it was in When Harry Met Sally. It will also be followed by someone running, rushing, basically moving far too fast to get to their love interest. This movie gave Hollywood the updated formula, a formula that had been in the lab for decades, a formula that would go on to revive the rom-com. Without it, and without its success, the 90s rom-com era, with its beautiful colors, sweet stories, and marvelously done happy endings, would not exist. While What's Up Doc is a tribute to Bringing Up Baby, it's also obsessed with Casablanca. In the middle of all the chaos, the two leads still find time to sit by a piano to play when time goes by. While they don't have any kind of in-depth discussion about the movie, this is a clear indication that Hollywood in the 70s has started to get nostalgic for 1940s cinema. When Harry Met Sally doesn't limit its obsession with Casablanca to a few lines and one musical performance. In fact, if you're an overthinker like me, you could theorize that this movie exists as a response to Casablanca. Early on, when they are driving from college, they get into an argument about Casablanca and whether the ending was good enough. Harry thinks that Bergman should have stayed with Bogart. Sally states that Bergman's decision was a practical one. Harry and Sally have clear chemistry from the get-go. After university, they both do the practical thing. They find stable jobs, and then they get into relationships that last for years. Relationships that will change them. Relationships they consider to be the end game. And yet, both of these relationships collapse. When they do, Harry and Sally find each other and realize that they were each other's endgame. Now, I think all of this talk about Casablanca in the movie is about figuring out whether Bergman will regret her decision. It's all well and good that she goes away with Victor Laszlo. After all, Laszlo is an important man with a noble cause, and it's made clear in Casablanca that Laszlo definitely loves her. However, it's a truth universally acknowledged that Bergman and Bogart belong together. So, will she regret it? The ending to When Harry Met Sally suggests that Bergman will in fact regret her decision, which in turn means that Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck will also spend the rest of their lives looking for each other. I swear this argument made sense in my own head. The romantic comedies that come out of the 90s are not masterpieces. They are good, cozy, fun, endlessly rewatchable, but they are not revolutionary. This being said, the movies still end up being iconic. Memorable stories with unforgettable characters, producing lines of dialogue that will capture the hearts of cinephiles for decades. I also don't think the directors were creating these movies hoping to produce another Roman Holiday. They wanted to produce stories in the vein of When Harry Met Sally. Some movies tinker with the formula a bit. These are the movies that we remember. Pretty Woman, 4 Weddings and a Funeral, My Best Friend's Wedding, and even while you are sleeping, push the rom-com formula to its limit. Notting Hill is a distillation of everything the 90s was trying to do with the genre. It features two of its most recognized faces as the leads, and produces a story that makes it the final installment in my unofficial trilogy. When we last caught up with the trilogy in Roman Holiday, I said that the ending was perfect because no journalist would survive being married to a crown princess. How about a bookstore owner and the world's leading actress? The answer is shockingly yes. But the reason this works is that this bookstore owner is Hugh Grant. I don't know about you, but what are the chances that there's a bookstore owner out there who looks like a young Hugh Grant? Forget the world's leading actress. Hugh Grant could land a crown princess. Sorry, let's move on. This movie continues the work that Four Weddings and a Funeral started. It creates a distinctly British rom-com that's not just about the leads. We have multiple stories that are interweaved into the main narrative. I especially like the story of Max and Bella, two of Hugh Grant's friends. It also features British comedy, which is much more dry compared to American comedy. I like it quite a lot. This movie features perhaps the most famous rom-com line. This is what 90s movies did so well. They created moments that stay with you for a very long time. They are not afraid of sincerity and vulnerability. They understand that no one successfully falls in love or gets into a relationship without revealing who they truly are, without taking a risk that could backfire. The 2000s are a messy decade for the rom-com. While the decade will produce masterpieces in the romance genre, its rom-coms stumble. We also get to a point where provocative sex-focused romantic comedies geared at men become a thing. The advantage that the 2000s has is that studios are willing to bet on anything. So many rom-coms were made during this era, like a wild number of them. If I was to pick a movie that I consider to be the most interesting, it would be 500 Days of Summer. However, this is not a traditional rom-com and is therefore disqualified. It's one of those meta movies that tell you to stop thinking that rom-coms are real. I'm not sure who goes to the movies thinking movies are real, but anyway, we start to deconstruct the genre from 2009 onwards. In the mid-2010s, we'll even have movies that parody the rom-com genre. Bridget Jones's Diary has three things going for it. It's British, it's an actual rom-com, and it has a timeless story. It also comes out in a decade that would deliver multiple globally recognizable rom-coms, few of which will attain iconic status. And those that do will be absolutely lambasted by critics. If you want to see what I'm talking about, look up the Rotten Tomato critic percentage for The Proposal or The Holiday. In fact, only Judd Apatow seems to be releasing movies that both the critics and the audience loves. So what does Bridget Jones's Diary do differently? It introduces the love triangle and actually executes it properly. It features Hugh Grant in a believable role as an asshole publishing executive. No more bookstores. It also features a very relatable story which uses a diary as a framing device. This is interesting and it makes the movie feel quite fresh. Other than this, the movie sticks to the formula and uses the same tropes that we've seen over the past 8 decades. However, it doesn't simply adhere to the tropes. It has fun with them. For example, the meet-cute between Mark Darcy and Bridget Jones isn't actually cute. It leads to them disliking each other. This means that as the movie progresses, Bridget Jones treats Mark Darcy harshly. Like James Stewart treating Margaret Sullivan with care in The Shop Around the Corner, Mark Darcy wins over Bridget Jones by being a gentleman. As the decade progresses, romantic comedies will become larger events, bringing in quite a lot at the box office. This reminds me of musicals in the 50s and 60s. Hollywood had found a cash cow and it was time to milk it. It's the reason so many rom-coms come out during this era. It's also the reason that the best of them don't rank as high in the history of rom-coms. They are good, but not really indisposable. If you ask someone to pick between How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days or Four Weddings and a Funeral, they'd probably pick the latter. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm just a 90s rom-com elitist. When the 2010s rolled around, the obvious had happened. The public was fatigued. The rom-com was like a spent tea bag. No flavor, no excitement, just blandness. Hollywood had two options: double down and attempt to make more money from the genre, or reinvent it. It doubled down, and by the end of the decade, the rom-com was virtually contributing $0 at the box office. A genre that was brought back to life by sincere storytelling was assassinated by movies that were produced for the sake of money and nothing else. Despite being at a great disadvantage, this decade manages to produce rom-coms that are far more original and enjoyable than those that came out in the 2000s. These rom-coms won't make as much money, but they make for more enjoyable rewatches. Crazy Rich Asians, The Big Sick, What If, and Enough Said are movies that I quite enjoy. There's also Ruby Sparks, a very strange rom-com that's more creative than all of the rom-coms released in the previous decade. One thing you'll notice when you watch rom-coms from the 2010s is that the formula is a bit unclear. The third act misunderstanding still exists, but other parts of the formula don't consistently appear. It's what makes these movies interesting. It's what gives me hope that someone out there will produce a rom-com that kickstarts a revival. Crazy Stupid Love is one of the movies that was released by Hollywood in hope of continuing milking its cash cow. It worked. It was successful at the box office, and it was also successful with critics. I chose this movie because it's a perfect showcase of the rom-com idea that this century has been grappling with. One of those ideas is sex and its power. Ryan Gosling wants Steve Carell to stop moping over his ex-wife and focus on sleeping with as many women as possible. The other main idea is revenge after being betrayed by your partner. It comes up a lot in the 2000s. Some movies are even fully built around this idea. This movie makes it clear that revenge doesn't really work if you're still in love. Carell ends up fighting for his wife because he realizes that you can't replace your soulmate by sleeping around. However, there is one idea that is particularly unique for the 2000s, an idea that will spill over into the 2010s. This movie, like quite a few in the 2000s, believes that one woman can change a man whose full-time job is sleeping around. Now, let's trace this idea back to its rom-com origins. Lover Comeback is an especially good candidate. Rock Hudson is an out-and-out player who meets Doris Day, and by the end of the movie he's ready to tie the knot. He goes from being an ad executive who takes his clients to strip clubs to being husband material in under 2 hours. By the time we get to the 2000s, our male lead has evolved. He's no longer doing his best to win over the girl. In fact, he's a womanizer. Thankfully, our female lead is a very special girl who can change him. Now, to be fair, if there's a girl who can change a man, it's Emma Stone. I don't fault Ryan Gosling for turning into a saint after meeting her. This idea also has its roots in our romanticization of love. We believe it to be a cure for everything, even personality traits that have accumulated over a long period of time. Consequently, this is yet another idea that will have staying power. We want to believe that there is one girl, our soulmate, who can turn us from bastards into gentlemen. I consider Crazy Stupid Love to be an audition for the more superior Gosling and Stone outing, La La Land. 10 decades of romantic comedies, each of the decades evolving the genre, until we finally arrive at a movie that would give us the only noteworthy modern musical. This is not bad for 100 years of experimentation, sincerity, witty banter, and well-earned happy endings.